Book 3 of Eudemian Ethics by Aristotle, translated by J. Solomon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Book 3, Chapter 1. That there are mean states, then, in the virtues, and that these are states of deliberate purpose, and that the opposite states are vices, and what these are, has been stated in its universal form. But let us take them individually, and speak of them in order, and first let us speak of bravery. All are practically agreed that the brave man is concerned with fears, and that bravery is one of the virtues. We distinguished also in the table confidence and fear as contraries. In a sense they are, indeed, opposed to one another. Clearly, then, those named after these habits will be similarly opposed to one another, e.g., the coward, for he is so called from fearing more than he ought, and being less confident than he ought, and the confident man, who is so called for fearing less than he ought, and being more confident than he ought. Hence they have names cognate to those of the qualities, e.g., confident is cognate to confidence. So that since bravery is the best habit in regard to fear and confidence, and one should be neither like the confident, who are defective in one way, excessive in another, nor like the cowards, of whom the same may be said, only not about the same objects, but inversely, for they are defective in confidence, and excessive in fear. It is clear that the middle habit between confidence and cowardice is bravery, for this is the best. The brave man seems to be in general fearless, the coward prone to fear. The latter fears many things and few, great things and small, and intensely and quickly, while his opposite fears either not at all, or slightly and reluctantly, and seldom, and great things only. The brave endures even what is very formidable, the coward not even what is slightly formidable. What then does the brave man endure? First, is it the things that appear formidable to himself or to another? If the latter, his bravery would be no considerable matter. But if it is the things formidable to himself, then he must find many things formidable, formidable things being things that cause fear to those who find them formidable, great fear if very formidable, slight fear if slightly formidable. Then it follows that the brave man feels much and serious fear. But on the contrary, bravery seemed to make a man fearless, fearlessness consisting in fearing few things, if any, and in fearing slightly and with reluctance. But perhaps we use formidable, like pleasant and good, in two senses. Some things are pleasant or good absolutely, others to a particular person pleasant or good, but absolutely bad and not pleasant, e.g., what is useful to the wicked, or pleasant to children as such. And similarly the formidable is either absolutely such, or such to a particular person. What then a coward as such fears is not formidable to any one, or but slightly so, but what is formidable to the majority of men, or to human nature, that we call absolutely formidable. But the brave man shows himself fearless towards these, and endures such things, they being to him formidable in one sense, but in another not; formidable to him qua man, but not formidable to him except slightly so, or not at all qua brave. These things, however, are terrible, for they are so to the majority of men. This is the reason, by the way, why the habit of the brave man is praised. His condition is analogous to that of the strong or healthy. For these are what they are, not because, in the case of the one, no toil, in the case of the other, no extreme, crushes them, but because they are either unaffected absolutely, or affected only to a slight extent by the things that affect the many or the majority. The sick, then, and the weak, and the cowardly are affected by the common affections, as well as by others, only more quickly and to a greater extent than the many. And further, by the things that affect the many they are wholly unaffected, or but slightly affected. But it is still questioned whether anything is terrible to the brave man, whether he would not be incapable of fear. May we not allow him to be capable of it in the way above mentioned? For bravery consists in following reason, and reason bids one choose the noble. Therefore the man who endures the terrible from any other cause than this is either out of his wits or confident, but the man who does so for the sake of the noble is alone fearless and brave. The coward, then, fears even what he ought not. The confident is confident even when he ought not to be. The brave man both fears and is confident when he ought to be, and is in this sense a mean, for he is confident or fears as reason bids him. But reason does not bid a man to endure what is very painful or destructive unless it is noble. Now the confident is confident about such things even if reason does not bid him be so, while the coward is not confident even if it does. The brave man alone is confident about them only if reason bids him. There are 5 kinds of courage, so named from a certain analogy between them, for they all endure the same things, but not for the same reasons. One is a civic courage, due to the sense of shame. Another is military, due to experience and knowledge, not, as Socrates said, of what is fearful, but of the resources they have to meet what is fearful. The third kind is due to inexperience and ignorance. It is that which makes children and madmen face objects moving towards them, and take hold of snakes. Another kind is due to hope, which makes those who have often been fortunate, or those who are drunk, face dangers, for wine makes them sanguine. Another kind is due to irrational feeling, e.g., love or anger. For a man in love is rather confident than timid, and faces many dangers, like him who slew the tyrant in Metapontium, or the man of whom stories are told in Crete. Similar is the action of anger or passion, for passion is beside itself. Hence wild boars are thought to be brave, though they are not really so, for they behave as such when beside themselves, but at other times are variable, like confident men. But still the bravery of passion is above all natural. Passion is invincible, and therefore children are excellent fighters. Civic courage is the effect of law, but in truth none of these forms is courage, though all are useful for encouragement in danger. So far we have spoken of the terrible generally. Now it is best to distinguish further. In general, then, whatever is productive of fear is called fearful, and this is all that causes destructive pain. For those who expect some other pain may perhaps have another pain and another emotion, but not fear. E.g., if a man foresees that he will suffer the pain of envy, or of jealousy, or of shame. But fear only occurs in connection with the expectation of pains whose nature is to be destructive to life. Therefore men who are very effeminate as to some things are brave, and some who are hard and enduring are cowards. Indeed, it is thought practically the special mark of bravery to take up a certain attitude towards death and the pain of it. For if a man were so constituted as to be patient as reason requires towards heat and cold, and similar not dangerous pains, but weak and timid about death, not for any other feeling, but just because it means destruction, while another was soft in regard to these, but unaffected in regard to death, the former would seem cowardly, the latter brave. For we speak of danger also only in regard to such objects of fear as bring near to us that which will cause such destruction. When this seems close, then we speak of danger. The objects of fear, then, in regard to which we call a man brave are, as we have said, those which appear capable of causing destructive pain, but only when they appear near and not far off, and are of such magnitude, real or apparent, as is not out of proportion to man. For some things must appear terrible too, and must upset any man. For just as things hot and cold and certain other powers are too strong for us, and the conditions of the human body, so it may be with regard to the emotions of the soul. The cowardly, then, and the confident are misled by their habits, for to the coward what is not terrible seems terrible, and what is slightly terrible greatly so, while in the opposite way to the confident the terrible seems safe, and the very terrible but slightly so. But the brave man thinks things what they truly are. Therefore, if a man faces the terrible through ignorance, e.g., if a man faces in the transport of madness the attack of a thunderbolt, he is not brave; nor yet if, knowing the magnitude of the danger, he faces it through passion, as the Celts take up their arms to go to meet the waves. In general, all the bravery of barbarians involves passion. But some face danger also for other pleasures, for passion is not without a certain pleasure, involving as it does the hope of vengeance. But still, whether a man faces death for this or some other pleasure, or to flee from greater evils, he would not justly be called brave. For if dying were pleasant, the profligate would have often died because of his incontinence, just as now; since what causes death is pleasant, though not death itself. Many knowingly incur death through their incontinence, but none of them would be thought brave even if they do it with perfect readiness to die. Nor is a man brave if he seeks death to avoid trouble, as many do, to use Agathon's words, bad men, too weak for toil, are in love with death. And so the poets narrate that Chiron, because of the pain of his wound, prayed for death and release from his immortality. Similarly, all who face dangers owing to experience are not really brave. This is what, perhaps, most soldiers do. For the truth is the exact opposite of what Socrates thought. He held that bravery was knowledge. But those who know how to ascend masts are confident, not because they know what is terrible, but because they know how to help themselves in dangers. Nor is all that makes men fight more boldly courage, for then, as Theognis puts it, strength and wealth would be bravery. Every man, he says, daunted by poverty. Obviously some, though cowards, face dangers because of their experience, because they do not think them dangers, as they know how to help themselves. And a proof of this is that, when they think they can get no help, and the danger is close at hand, they no longer face it. But it is where shame, among all such causes, makes a man face danger, that the man would most seem to be brave. As Homer says, Hector faced the danger from Achilles, and shame seized Hector. And again, Polydamas will be the first to taunt me. Such bravery is civic, but the true bravery is neither this nor any of the others, but like them, as is also the bravery of brutes, which from passion run to meet the blow. For a man ought to hold his ground, though frightened, not because he will incur disrepute, nor through anger, nor because he does not expect to be killed, or has powers by which to protect himself. For in that case he will not even think that there is anything to be feared. But since all virtue implies deliberate choice, we have said before what this means, and that it makes a man choose everything for the sake of some end, and that the end is the noble. It is clear that bravery, because it is a virtue, will make a man face the fearful for some end, so that he does it neither through ignorance, for his virtue rather makes him judge correctly, nor for pleasure, but because the act is noble, since if it be not noble but frantic, he does not face the danger, for that would be disgraceful. In regard then to what things bravery is a mean state, between what and why, and the meaning of the fearful, we have now spoken tolerably adequately for our present purpose. Chapter 2. After this we must try to draw certain distinctions regarding profligacy and temperance. Profligate has many senses. It is, in a sense, the unchastened and uncured, as the undivided is the not divided, and with the same two classes, i.e. the one capable, the other incapable of division. For undivided means both what is incapable of division, and what is capable but not actually divided, and so with profligate. For it is both that which by its nature refuses chastening, and that which is of a nature to accept, but has not yet received chastening, for the faults in regard to which the temperate man acts rightly, e.g. children. For we give them the same name as the profligate, but because of this latter kind of profligacy. And further, it is in different senses that we give the name to those hard to cure, and to those whom it is quite impossible to cure through chastening. Profligacy, then, having many senses, it is clear that it has to do with certain pleasures and pains, and that the forms differ from one another, and from other states by the kind of attitude towards these. We have already stated how, in the use of the word profligacy, we apply it to various states by analogy. As to those who from insensibility are unmoved by these same pleasures, some call them insensible, while others describe them as such by other names. But this state is not very familiar or common, because all rather err in the opposite direction, and it is congenital to all to be overcome by, and to be sensible to such pleasures. It is the state chiefly of such as the boors introduced on the stage by comic writers, who keep aloof from even moderate and necessary pleasures. But since temperance has to do with pleasures, it must also have to do with certain appetites. We must then ascertain which, for the temperate man does not exhibit his temperance in regard to all appetites and all pleasures, but about the objects, as it seems, of two senses, taste and touch, or rather really about those of touch alone. For his temperance is shown not in regard to visual pleasure in the beautiful, so long as it is unaccompanied by sexual appetite, or visual pain at the ugly, nor again in regard to the pleasure or pain of the ear at harmony or discord, nor again in regard to olfactory pleasure or pain at pleasant or disagreeable odors. Nor is a man called profligate for feeling or want of feeling in regard to such matters. For instance, if one sees a beautiful statue, or horse, or human being, or hears singing, without any accompanying wish for eating, drinking, or sexual indulgence, but only with the wish to see the beautiful and to hear the singers, he would not be thought profligate any more than those who were charmed by the sirens. Temperance and profligacy have to do with those two senses whose objects are alone felt by and give pleasure and pain to brutes as well, and these are the senses of taste and touch, the brutes seeming insensible to the pleasures of practically all the other senses alike, e.g. harmony or beauty, for they obviously have no feeling worth mentioning at the mere sight of the beautiful or the hearing of the harmonious, except perhaps in some marvellous instances. And with regard to pleasant and disagreeable odors, it is the same, though all their senses are sharper than ours. They do indeed feel pleasure at certain odors, but these gladden them accidentally and not of their own nature, being those that give us pleasure owing to expectation and memory, e.g. the pleasure from the scent of food or drinks, for these we enjoy because of a different pleasure, that of eating or drinking. The odors enjoyed for their own nature are such as those of flowers. Therefore Stratonicus neatly remarked that these smell beautifully, food, etc., pleasantly. Indeed, the brutes are not excited over every pleasure connected with taste, e.g. not over those which are felt in the tip of the tongue, but only over those that are felt in the gullet, the sensation being one of touch rather than of taste. Therefore gluttons pray not for a long tongue, but for the gullet of a crane, as did Philoxenos, the son of Eryxes. Therefore, broadly, we should regard profligacy as concerned with objects of touch. Similarly it is with such pleasures that the profligate man is concerned. For drunkenness, gluttony, lecherousness, gormandizing, and all such things are concerned with the above-mentioned senses, and these are the parts into which we divide profligacy. But in regard to the pleasures of sight, hearing, and smell, no one is called profligate if he is in excess, but we blame without considering disgraceful such faults, and all in regard to which we do not speak of men as continent. The incontinent are neither profligate nor temperate. The man, then, so constituted as to be deficient in the pleasures in which all must in general partake and rejoice, is insensible, or whatever else we ought to call him. The man in excess is profligate. For all naturally take delight in these objects, and conceive appetites for them, and neither are nor are called profligate, for they neither exceed by rejoicing more than is right when they get them, nor by feeling greater pain than they ought when they miss them, nor are they insensible, for they are not deficient in the feeling of joy or pain, but rather in excess. But since there is excess and defect in regard to these things, there is clearly also a mean, and this state is the best and opposed to both of the others, so that if the best state about the objects with which the profligate is concerned is temperance, temperance would be the mean state in regard to the above-mentioned sensible pleasures, the mean between profligacy and insensibility, the excess being profligacy, and the defect either nameless or expressed by the names we have suggested. More accurate distinctions about the class of pleasures will be drawn in what is said later about continence and incontinence. Chapter 3. In the same way we must ascertain what is gentleness and irascibility. For we see that the gentle is concerned with the pain that arises from anger being characterized by a certain attitude towards this. We have given in our list, as opposed to the passionate, irascible, and savage, all such being names for the same state, the slavish and the senseless, for these are practically the names we apply to those who are not moved to anger even when they ought, but take insults easily, and are humble towards contempt. For slowness to anger is opposed to quickness, violence to quietness, long persistence in that feeling of pain which we call anger to short. And since there is here, as we have said, there is elsewhere excess and defect, for the irascible is one that feels anger more quickly, to a greater degree, and for a longer time, and when he ought not, and at what he ought not, and frequently, while the slavish is the opposite, it is clear that there is a mean to this inequality. Since, then, both the above-mentioned habits are wrong, it is clear that the mean state between them is good, for he is neither too soon nor too late, and does not feel anger when he ought not, nor feel no anger when he ought. So that since in regard to these emotions the best condition is gentleness, gentleness would be a mean state, and the gentle a mean between the irascible and the slavish. Chapter 4. Also, magnanimity, magnificence, and liberality are mean states, liberality being shown in the acquisition or expenditure of wealth. For the man who is more pleased than he ought to be with every acquisition, and more pained than he ought to be at every expenditure, is illiberal. He who feels less of both than he ought is lavish. He who feels both as he ought is liberal. By as he ought, both in this and in the other cases, I mean, as right reason directs. But since the two former show their nature respectively by excess and defect, and where there are extremes there is also a mean, and that is best, a single best for each kind of action, liberality must be the mean between lavishness and meanness in regard to the acquisition and expenditure of wealth. I take wealth and the art of wealth in two senses, the art in one sense being the proper use of one's property, say of a shoe or a coat, in the other an accidental mode of using it, not the use of a shoe for a weight, but say the selling of it, or letting it out for money, for here too the shoe is used. Now the lover of money is a man eager for actual money, which is a sign of possession taking the place of the accidental use of other possessions. But the illiberal man may even be lavish in the accidental pursuit of wealth, for it is in the natural pursuit of it that he aims at increase. The lavish runs short of necessaries, but the liberal man gives his superfluities. There are also species of these genera which exceed or fall short as regards parts of the subject matter of liberality, e.g. the sparing, the skinflint, the grasper at disgraceful gain are all illiberal. The sparing is characterized by his refusal to spend, the grasper at disgraceful gain by his readiness to accept anything, the skinflint by his strong feeling over small amounts, while the man who has the sort of injustice that involves meanness is a false reckoner and cheat, and similarly one class of spendthrift is a waster by his disorderly expenditure, the other a fool who cannot bear the pain of calculation. Chapter 5. As to magnanimity, we must define its specific nature from the qualities that we ascribe to the magnanimous. For, just as with other things, in virtue of their nearness and likeness up to a certain point, their divergence beyond that point escapes notice, so it is with magnanimity. Therefore, sometimes men really opposite lay claim to the same character, e.g., the lavish to that of the liberal, the self-willed to that of the dignified, the confident to that of the brave, for they are concerned with the same things, and are, up to a certain point, contiguous. Thus the brave man and the confident are alike ready to face danger, but the former in one way, the latter in another, and these ways differ greatly. Now we assert that the magnanimous man, as is indicated by the name we apply to him, is characterized by a certain greatness of soul and faculty, and so he seems like the dignified and the magnificent man, since magnanimity seems to accompany all the virtues. For to distinguish correctly great goods from small is laudable. Now those goods are thought great which are pursued by the man of the best habit in regard to what seem to be pleasures, and magnanimity is the best habit. But every special virtue correctly distinguishes the greater from the less among its objects, as the wise man and virtue would direct, so that all the virtues seem to go with this one of magnanimity, or this with all the virtues. Further, it seems characteristic of the magnanimous man to be disdainful. Each virtue makes one disdainful of what is esteemed great contrary to reason, e.g., bravery disdains dangers of this kind, for it considers it disgraceful to hold them great, and numbers are not always fearful. So the temperate disdains many great pleasures, and the liberal wealth. But this characteristic seems to belong to the magnanimous man because he cares about few things only, and those great, and not because some one else thinks them so. The magnanimous man would consider rather what one good man thinks than many ordinary men, as Antiphon after his condemnation said to Agathon when he praised his defense of himself. Contempt seems particularly the special characteristic of the magnanimous man, and again, as regards honor, life, and wealth, about which mankind seems to care, he values none of them except honor. He would be pained if denied honor, and if ruled by one undeserving. He delights most of all when he obtains honor. In this way he would seem to contradict himself, for to be concerned above all with honor, and yet to disdain the multitude and reputation, are inconsistent. So we must first distinguish. For honor, great or small, is of two kinds, for it may be given by a crowd of ordinary men, or by those worthy of consideration. And again, there is a difference according to the ground on which honor is given. For it is made great not merely by the number of those who give the honor or by their quality, but also by its being precious. But in reality, power and all other goods are precious and worthy of pursuit only if they are truly great, so that there is no virtue without greatness. Therefore every virtue, as we have said, makes man magnanimous in regard to the object with which that virtue is concerned. But still there is a single virtue, magnanimity, alongside of the other virtues, and he who has this must be called in a special sense magnanimous. But since some goods are precious and some not, according to the distinction above made, and of such goods some are in truth great, and some small, and of these some men are worthy, and think themselves so, among these we must look for the magnanimous man. There must be 4 different kinds of men. For a man may be worthy of great goods, and think himself worthy of them, and again there may be small goods, and a man worthy of them, and thinking himself worthy, and we may have the opposites in regard to either kind of goods. For there may be a man worthy of small, who thinks himself worthy of great and esteemed goods, and again one worthy of great, but thinking himself worthy only of small. He then who is worthy of the small, but thinks himself worthy of the great, is blamable. For it is silly and not noble that he should obtain out of proportion to his worth. The man also is blamable who, being worthy of great goods, because he possesses the gifts that make a man worthy, does not think himself worthy to share in them. There remains then the opposite of these 2, the man who is worthy of great goods and thinks himself worthy of them, such being his disposition, he is the mean between the other 2, and is praiseworthy. Since then, in respect of the choice and use of honour and the other esteemed goods, the best condition is magnanimity, and we define the magnanimous man as being this, and not as being concerned with things useful, and since this mean is the most praiseworthy state, it is clear that magnanimity is a mean. But of the opposites, as shown in our list, the quality consisting in thinking oneself worthy of great goods, when not worthy, is vanity. For we give the name of vain to those who think themselves worthy of great things, though they are not. But the quality of not thinking oneself worthy of great things, though one is, we call mean-spiritedness. For it is held to be the mark of the mean-spirited not to think himself worthy of anything great, though he possesses that for which he would justly be deemed worthy of it. Hence it follows that magnanimity is a mean between vanity and mean-spiritedness. The 4th of the sorts of men we have distinguished is neither wholly blamable, nor yet magnanimous, not having to do with anything that possesses greatness, for he is neither worthy, nor thinks himself worthy of great goods. Therefore he is not opposite to the magnanimous man, yet to be worthy and think oneself worthy of small goods might seem opposite to being worthy and thinking oneself worthy of great ones. But such a man is not opposite to the magnanimous man, for he is not to be blamed, his habit being what reason directs. He is in fact similar in nature to the magnanimous man, for both think themselves worthy of what they really are worthy of. He might become magnanimous, for of whatever he is worthy of, he will think himself worthy. But the mean-spirited man, who, possessed of great and honourable qualities, does not think himself worthy of great good, what would he do if he deserved only small? Either he would think himself worthy of great goods, and thus be vain, or else of still smaller than he has. Therefore no one would call a man mean-spirited, because, being an alien in a city, he does not claim to govern but submits, but only one who does not, being well born and thinking power a great thing. Chapter 6. The magnificent man is not concerned with any and every action or choice, but with expenditure, unless we use the name metaphorically. Without expense there cannot be magnificence. It is the fitting in ornament, but ornament is not to be got out of ordinary expenditure, but consists in surpassing the merely necessary. The man, then, who tends to choose in great expenditure the fitting magnitude, and desires this sort of mean, and with a view to this sort of pleasure, is magnificent. The man whose inclination is to something larger than necessary, but out of harmony, has no name, though he is near to those called by some tasteless and showy. E.g., if a rich man, spending money on the marriage of a favourite, thinks it sufficient to make such arrangements as one makes to entertain those who drink to the good genius, he is shabby, while one who receives guests of this sort in the way suited to a marriage feast resembles the showy man, if he does it neither for the sake of reputation nor to gain power. But he who entertains suitably and as reason directs, is magnificent, for what looks well is the suitable, nothing unsuitable is fitting, and what one does should be fitting, for in what is fitting is involved suitability both to the object, e.g. one thing is fitting for a servant's, another for a favourite's wedding, and to the entertainer both in extent and kind, e.g. one thought that the mission conducted by Themistocles to the Olympian games was not fitting to him because of his previous low station, but would have been to Cimon. But the man who is indifferent to questions of suitability is in none of the above classes. Similarly, with liberality, for a man may be neither liberal nor illiberal. Chapter 7. In general, of the other blamable or praiseworthy qualities of character, some are excesses, others defects, others means, but of feelings, e.g. the envious man, and the man who rejoices over another's misfortunes. For to consider the habits to which they owe their names, envy is pain felt at deserved good fortune, while the feeling of the man who rejoices at misfortunes has itself no name. But such a man shows his nature by rejoicing over undeserved ill fortune. Between them is the man inclined to righteous indignation, the name given by the ancients to pain felt at either good or bad fortune if undeserved, or to joy felt at them if deserved. Hence they make righteous indignation (nemesis) a god. Shame is a mean between shamelessness and shyness, for the man who thinks of no one's opinion is shameless, he who thinks of every one's alike is shy, he who thinks only of that of apparently good men is modest. Friendliness is a mean between animosity and flattery, for the man who readily accommodates himself in all respects to another's desires is a flatterer, the man who opposes every desire is prone to enmity, the man who neither accommodates himself to, nor resists every one's pleasure, but only accommodates himself to what seems to be best, is friendly. Dignity is a mean between self-will and too great obligingness, for the contemptuous man who lives with no consideration for another is self-willed. The man who adapts his whole life to another and is submissive to everybody is too obliging. But he who acts thus in certain cases, but not in others, and only to those worthy, is dignified. The sincere and simple, or as he is called, downright man, is a mean between the dissembler and the charlatan, for the man who knowingly and falsely depreciates himself is a dissembler, the man who exalts himself is a charlatan, the man who represents himself as he is sincere, and in the Homeric phrase, intelligent. In general, the one loves truth, the other a lie. Wittiness also is a mean, the witty being a mean between the boorish or stiff and the buffoon. For just as the squeamish differs from the omnivorous, in that the one takes little or nothing, and that with reluctance, while the other accepts everything readily, so is the boor related to the vulgar buffoon. The one accepts nothing comic without difficulty, the other takes all easily and with pleasure. Neither attitude is right. One ought to accept some things and not others, as reason directs, and the man who does this is witty. The proof is the usual one. Wittiness of this kind, supposing we do not use the word in some transferred sense, is the best habit, and the mean is praiseworthy, and the extremes blamable. But wit, being of two kinds, one being delight in the comic, even when directed against oneself, if it be really comic, like a jeer, the other being the faculty of producing such things, the two sorts differ from one another, but both are means. For the man that can produce what a good judge will be pleased at, even if the joke is against himself, will be midway between the vulgar and the frigid man. This definition is better than that which merely requires the thing said to be not painful to the person jeered at, no matter what sort of man he is. One ought rather to please the man who is in the mean, for he is a good judge. All these mean states are praiseworthy without being virtues, nor are their opposites vices, for they do not involve deliberate choice. All of them occur in the classifications of affections, for each is an affection. But since they are natural, they tend to the natural virtues. For, as will be said later, each virtue is found both naturally and also otherwise, viz., as including thought. Envy then tends to injustice, for the acts arising from it affect another; righteous indignation to justice, shame to temperance, whence some even put temperance into this genus. The sincere and the false are respectively sensible and foolish, but the mean is more opposed to the extremes than these to one another, because the mean is found with neither, but the extremes often with one another, and sometimes the same people are at once cowardly and confident, or lavish in some ways, illiberal in others, and in general are lacking in uniformity in a bad sense. For if they lack uniformity in a good sense, men of the mean type are produced, since in a way both extremes are present in the mean. The opposition between the mean and the extremes does not seem to be alike in both cases. Sometimes the opposition is that of the excessive extreme, sometimes that of the defective, and the causes are the two first given: rarity, e.g., of those insensible to pleasures, and the fact that the error to which we are most prone seems the more opposed to the mean. There is a third reason, namely, that the more like seems less opposite, e.g., confidence to bravery, lavishness to liberality. We have then spoken sufficiently about the other praiseworthy virtues. We must now speak of justice. Note: Books 4, 5, and 6 of Eudemian Ethics are Books 5, 6, and 7 of Nicomachean Ethics, and have been excluded from this translation. And of Book 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 1 of Book 7 of Eudemian Ethics by Aristotle, translated by J. Solomon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. Friendship, what it is, and of what nature, who is a friend, and whether friendship has one or many senses, and if many, how many, and further, how we should treat a friend, and what is justice in friendship, all this must be examined not less than any of the things that are noble and desirable in character. For it is thought to be the special business of the political art to produce friendship, and men say that virtue is useful for this, for those who are unjustly treated by one another cannot be friends to one another. Further, all say that justice and injustice are specially exhibited towards friends. The same man seems both good and a friend, and friendship seems a sort of moral habit, and if one wishes to act without injustice, it is enough to make friends, for genuine friends do not act unjustly. But neither will men act unjustly if they are just. Therefore justice and friendship are either the same or not far different. Further, men believe a friend to be among the greatest of goods, and friendlessness and solitude to be most terrible, because all life and voluntary association is with friends. For we spend our days with our family, kinsmen or comrades, children, parents, or wife. The private justice practiced to friends depends on ourselves alone, while justice towards all others is determined by the laws, and does not depend on us. Many questions are raised about friendship. There is the view of those who include the external world, and give the term an extended meaning, for some think that like is friend to like, whence the saying, "How God ever draws like to like," or the saying, crow to crow, or thief knows thief, and wolf, wolf. The physicists even systematize the whole of nature on the principle that like goes to like. Whence Empedocles said that the dog sat on the tile because it was most like it. Some then describe a friend thus, but others say that opposites are friends, for they say the loved and desired is in every case a friend, but the dry does not desire the dry, but the moist. Whence the sayings, earth loves the rain, and in all things change is pleasant. But change is change to an opposite, and like hates like, for potter is jealous of potter. And animals nourished from the same source are enemies. Such then is the discrepancy between these views, for some think the like a friend, and the opposite an enemy. The less is ever the enemy of the more, and begins a day of hate. And further, the places of contraries are separated, but friendship seems to bring together. But others think opposites are friends, and Heraclitus blames the poet who wrote, "May strife perish from among gods and men." For, says he, there could not be harmony without the low and the high note, nor living things without male and female, two opposites. There are then these two views about friendship, and when so far separated from one another, both are too broad. There are other views that come nearer to, and are more suitable to observed facts. Some think that bad men cannot be friends, but only the good, while others think it strange that mothers should not love their own children. Even among the brutes we find such friendship; at least they choose to die for their children. Some again think that we only regard the useful as a friend, their proof being that all pursue the useful, but the useless, even in themselves, they throw away. As old Socrates said, citing the case of our spittle, hairs, and nails. And that we cast off useless parts, and in the end, at death, our very body, the corpse, being useless. But those who have a use for it, keep it, as in Egypt. Now, all these things, i.e., likeness, contrariety, utility, seem opposed to one another. For the like is useless to the like, and contrariety is furthest removed from likeness, and the contrary is most useless to its contrary, for contraries destroy one another. Further, some think it easy to acquire a friend, others a very rare thing to recognize one, and impossible without misfortune, for all wish to seem friends to the prosperous. But others would have us distrust even those who remain with us in misfortune, alleging that they are deceiving us and making pretense, that by giving their company to us when we are in misfortune, they may obtain our friendship when we are again prosperous. Chapter 2. We must then find a method that will best explain the views held on these topics, and also put an end to difficulties and contradictions. And this will happen if the contrary views are seen to be held with some show of reason. Such a view will be most in harmony with the facts of observation, and both the contradictory statements will in the end stand, if what is said is true in one sense, but untrue in another. Another puzzle is whether the good or the pleasant is the object of love. For if we love what we desire, and love is of this kind, for none is a lover but one who ever loves, and if desire is for the pleasant, in this way the object of love would be the pleasant. But if it is what we wish for, then it is the good and the pleasant being different. About all these and the other cognate questions we must attempt to gain clear distinctions, starting from the following principle. The desired and the wished for is either the good or the apparent good. Now this is why the pleasant is desired, for it is an apparent good. For some think it such, and to some it appears such, though they do not think so. For appearance and opinion do not reside in the same part of the soul. It is clear, then, that we love both the good and the pleasant. This being settled, we must make another assumption. Of the good, some is absolutely good, some good to a particular man, though not absolutely, and the same things are at once absolutely good and absolutely pleasant. For we say that what is advantageous to a body in health is absolutely good for a body, but not what is good for a sick body, such as drugs and the knife. Similarly, things absolutely pleasant to a body are those pleasant to a healthy and unaffected body, e.g., seeing in light, not in darkness, though the opposite is the case to one with ophthalmia. And the pleasanter wine is not that which is pleasant to one whose tongue has been spoiled by inebriety, for such men add vinegar to it, but that which is pleasant to sensation unspoiled. So with the soul, what is pleasant not to children or brutes, but to the adult is really pleasant; at least, when we remember both, we choose the latter. And as the child or brute is to the adult man, so are the bad and foolish to the good and sensible. To these, that which suits their habit is pleasant, and that is the good and noble. Since, then, good has many meanings, for one thing we call good because its nature is such, and another because it is profitable and useful, and further, the pleasant is in part absolutely pleasant and absolutely good, and in part pleasant to a particular individual and apparent good, just as in the case of inanimate things we may choose and love a thing for either of these reasons, so in the case of a man loving one because of his character or because of virtue, another because he is profitable and useful, another because he is pleasant and for pleasure. And a man becomes a friend when he is loved and returns that love, and this is recognized by the two men in question. There must then be three kinds of love, not all being so named for one thing, or as species of one genus, nor yet having the same name quite by mere accident. For all the senses of love are related to one which is the primary, just as is the case with the word medical, and just as we speak of a medical soul, body, instrument, or act, but properly the name belongs to that primarily so called. The primary is that of which the definition is implied in the definition of all, e.g., a medical instrument is one that a medical man would use, but the definition of the instrument is not implied in that of medical man. Everywhere, then, we seek for the primary, but because the universal is primary, they also take the primary to be universal, and this is an error. And so they are not able to do justice to all the observed facts about friendship, for since one definition will not suit all, they think there are no other friendships, but the others are friendships, only not similarly so. But they, finding the primary friendship will not suit, assuming it would be universal if really primary, deny that the other friendships even are friendships, whereas there are many species of friendship. This was part of what we have already said, since we have distinguished the three senses of friendship, one due to virtue, another to usefulness, a third to pleasantness. Of these, the friendship based on usefulness is of course that of the majority. Men love one another because of their usefulness, and to the extent of this, so we have the proverb, Glaukos, a helper, is a friend so long as he fights. And the Athenians no longer know the Megarians. But the friendship based on pleasure is that of the young, for they are sensitive to pleasure. Therefore also their friendship easily changes, for with a change in their characters, as they grow up, there is also a change in their pleasures. But the friendship based on virtue is that of the best men. It is clear from this that the primary friendship, that of good men, is a mutual returning of love and purpose. For what is loved is dear to him who loves it, but a man loving another man is himself dear also to the man loved. This friendship, then, is peculiar to man, for he alone perceives another's purpose. But the other friendships are found also among the brutes, where utility is in some degree present, both between tame animals and men, and between animals themselves, as in the case mentioned by Herodotus of the friendship between the sandpiper and the crocodile, and the coming together and parting of birds that soothsayers speak of. The bad may be friends to one another on the ground both of usefulness and of pleasure, but some deny them to be friends, because there is not the primary friendship between them. For a bad man will injure a bad man, and those who are injured by one another do not love one another, but in fact they love, only not with the primary friendship. Nothing prevents their loving with the other kinds, for, owing to pleasure, they put up with each other's injury, so long as they are incontinent. But those whose love is based on pleasure do not seem to be friends when we look carefully, because their friendship is not of the primary kind, being unstable, while that is stable. It is, however, as has been said, a friendship, only not the primary kind, but derived from it. To speak then of friendship in the primary sense only is to do violence to facts, and makes one assert paradoxes. But it is impossible for all friendships to come under one definition. The only alternative left is that in a sense there is only one friendship, the primary, but in a sense all kinds are friendship, not as possessing a common name accidentally without being specially related to one another, nor yet as falling under one species, but rather as in relation to one and the same thing. But since the same thing is at the same time absolutely good and absolutely pleasant, if nothing interferes, and the genuine friend is absolutely the friend in the primary sense, and such is the man desirable for himself, and he must be such, for the man to whom one wishes good to happen for himself, one must also desire to exist, the genuine friend is also absolutely pleasant. Hence any sort of friend is thought pleasant. But here one ought rather to distinguish further, for the subject needs reflection. Is what is good for oneself, or what is good, absolutely dear? And is actual loving attended with pleasure, so that the loved object is pleasant or not? For the two must be harmonized. For what is not absolutely good, but perhaps bad, is something to avoid, and what is not good for oneself is nothing to one. But what is sought is that the absolutely good should be good in the further sense of being good to the individual. For the absolutely good is absolutely desirable, but for each individual his own, and these must agree. Virtue brings about this agreement, and the political art exists to make them agree, for those to whom as yet they do not. And one who is a human being is ready and on the road for this, for by nature that which is absolutely good is good to him, and man rather than woman, and the gifted rather than the ungifted, but the road is through pleasure. The noble must be pleasant. But when these two disagree, a man cannot yet be perfectly good, for incontinence may arise. For it is in the disagreement of the good with the pleasant in the passions that incontinence occurs. So that since the primary friendship is grounded on virtue, friends of this sort will be themselves absolutely good, and this not because they are useful, but in another way. For good to the individual and the absolutely good are two, and as with the profitable, so with habits. For the absolutely profitable differs from what is profitable to certain people, as taking exercise does from taking drugs. So that the habit called human virtue is of two kinds, for we will assume man to be one of the things excellent by nature. Therefore the virtue of the naturally excellent is an absolute good, but the virtue of that which is not thus good only to it. Similarly, then, with the pleasant. For here one must pause and examine whether friendship can exist without pleasure, how such a friendship differs from other friendship, and on which of the two, goodness or pleasure, the loving depends, whether one loves a man because he is good, even if not pleasant, and in any case not for his pleasantness. Now, loving having two senses, does actual love seem to involve pleasure because activity is good? It is clear that just as in science what we have recently contemplated and learnt is most perceptible because of its pleasantness, so also is the recognition of the familiar, and the same account applies to both. Naturally, at least, the absolutely good is absolutely pleasant, and pleasant to those to whom it is good. From which it at once follows that like takes pleasure in like, and that nothing is so pleasant to man as man. And if this is so even before they are perfect, it is clear it must be so when they are perfected, and the good man is perfect. But if active loving is a mutual choice with pleasure in each other's acquaintanceship, it is clear that in general the primary friendship is a reciprocal choice of the absolutely good and pleasant, because it is good and pleasant, and friendship itself is the habit from which such choice springs. For its function is an activity, and this is not external, but in the one who feels love. But the function of every faculty is external, for it is in something different, or in oneself qua different. Therefore to love is to feel pleasure, but not to be loved. For to be loved is the activity of what is lovable, but to love is the activity of friendship also. And the one is found only in the animate, the other also in the inanimate, for even inanimate things are loved. But since active loving is to treat the loved qua loved, and the friend is loved by the friend qua friend, and not qua musician or doctor, the pleasure coming from him merely as being himself is the pleasure of friendship, for he loves the object as himself, and not for being something else. So that if he does not rejoice in him for being good, the primary friendship does not exist, nor should any of his incidental qualities hinder more than his goodness gives pleasure. For if a man has an unpleasant odor, he is left, for he must be content with goodwill without actual association. This then is primary friendship, and all admit it to be friendship. It is through it that the other friendships seem friendships to some, but are doubted to be such by others. For friendship seems something stable, and this alone is stable. For a formed decision is stable, and where we do not act quickly or easily, we get the decision right. There is no stable friendship without confidence, but confidence needs time. One must then make trial, as Theognis says, you cannot know the mind of man or woman till you have tried them as you might cattle. Nor is a friend made except through time. They do indeed wish to be friends, and such a state easily passes muster as friendship. For when men are eager to be friends, by performing every friendly service to one another, they think they not merely wish to be, but are friends. But it happens with friendship, as with other things, as man is not in health merely because he wishes to be so, neither are men at once friends as soon as they wish to be friends. The proof is that men in this condition, without having made trial of one another, are easily made enemies. Wherever each has allowed the other to test him, they are not easily made enemies. But where they have not, they will be persuaded whenever those who try to break up the friendship produce evidence. It is clear at the same time that this friendship does not exist between the bad, for the bad man feels distrust and is malignant to all, measuring others by himself. Therefore the good are more easily deceived unless experience has taught them distrust. But the bad prefer natural goods to a friend, and none of them loves a man so much as things, therefore they are not friends. The proverbial community among friends is not found among them. The friend is made a part of things, not things regarded as part of the friend. The primary friendship, then, is not found between many, for it is hard to test many men, for one would have to live with each. Nor should one choose a friend like a garment. Yet in all things it seems the mark of a sensible man to choose the better of two alternatives. And if one has used the worse garment for a long time, and not the better is to be chosen, but not in place of an old friend, one of whom you do not know whether he is better. For a friend is not to be had without trial, nor in a single day. But there is need of time, and so the bushel of salt has become proverbial. He must also be not merely good absolutely, but good for you, if the friend is to be a friend to you. For a man is good absolutely by being good, but a friend by being good for another, and absolutely good, and friend when these two attributes are combined, so that what is absolutely good is good for the other, or else not absolutely good, but good to another in the sense of useful. But the need of active loving also prevents one from being at the same time a friend to many, for one cannot be active towards many at the same time. From these facts, then, it is clear that it is correctly said that friendship is a stable thing, just as happiness is a thing sufficient in itself. It has been rightly said, for nature is stable, but not wealth. But it is better to say virtue than nature, and time is said to show the friend, and bad fortune rather than good fortune. For then it is clear that the goods of friends are common, for these alone, instead of things naturally good and evil, which are the matters with which good and bad fortune are concerned, choose a man rather than the existence of some of those things, and the non-existence of others. But misfortune shows those who are not really friends, but friends only for some accidental utility. But time reveals both sorts. For even the useful man does not show his usefulness quickly, as the pleasant man does his pleasantness, yet the absolutely pleasant is not quick to show himself either. For men are like wines and meats. The pleasantness of them shows itself quickly, but if it continues longer it is unpleasant and not sweet. And so it is with men. For the absolutely pleasant must be determined as such by the end it realizes, and the time for which it continues pleasant. Even the vulgar would admit this, judging not merely according to results, but in the way in which, speaking of a drink, they call it sweeter. For this is unpleasant, not for the result, but from not being continuous, though it deceives us at the start. The first friendship, then, by reason of which the others get the name, is that based on virtue, and due to the pleasure of virtue, as has been said before. The other kinds occur also in children, brutes, and bad men, whence the sayings, like is pleased with like, and bad adheres to bad from pleasure. And the bad may be pleasant to one another, not qua bad, or qua neither good nor bad, but say as both being musicians, or the one fond of music, and the other a musician, and inasmuch as all have some good in them, and in this way they harmonize with one another. Further, they might be useful and profitable to one another, not absolutely, but in relation to their purpose, in virtue of some neutral characteristic. Also a bad man may be a friend to a good, the bad being of use to the good in relation to the good man's existing purpose, the good to the incontinent in relation to his existing purpose, and to the bad in relation to his natural purpose. And he will wish for his friend what is good, the absolutely good absolutely, and conditionally what is good for the friend, so far as poverty or illness is of advantage to him, and these for the sake of absolute goods. Taking a medicine is an instance, for that no one wishes, but wishes only for some particular purpose. Further, a good man and a bad man may be friends in the way in which those not good might be friends to one another. a man might be pleasant, not as bad, but as partaking in some common property, e.g., as being musical, or again, so far as there is something good in all, for which reason some might be glad to associate even with the good, or in so far as they suit each individual, for all have something of the good. Chapter 3. These, then, are three kinds of friendship, and in all of them the word friendship implies a kind of equality. For even those who are friends through virtue are mutually friends by a sort of equality of virtue. But another variety is the friendship of superiority to inferiority, e.g., as the virtue of a god is superior to that of a man, for this is another kind of friendship, and in general that of ruler to subject, just as justice in this case is different, for here it is a proportional equality, not numerical equality. Into this class falls the relation of father to son, and of benefactor to beneficiary, and there are varieties of these again, e.g., there is a difference between the relation of father to son, and of husband to wife, the latter being that of ruler to subject, the former that of benefactor to beneficiary. In these varieties there is not at all, or at least not in equal degree, the return of love for love, for it would be ridiculous to accuse God because the love one receives in return from him is not equal to the love given him, or for the subject to make the same complaint against his ruler. For the part of a ruler is to receive, not to give love, or at least to give love in a different way. And the pleasure is different, and that of the man who needs nothing over his own possessions or child, and that of him who lacks over what comes to him, are not the same. Similarly also with those who are friends through use or pleasure, some are on an equal footing with each other, in others there is the relation of superiority and inferiority. Therefore those who think themselves to be on the former footing find fault if the other is not equally useful to and a benefactor of them. And similarly with regard to pleasure. This is obvious in the case of lover and beloved, for this is frequently a cause of strife between them. The lover does not perceive that the passion in each has not the same reason. Therefore Ηνικος has said, "A beloved, not a lover, would say such things." But they think that there is the same reason for the passion of each. Chapter 4. There being then, as has been said, three kinds of friendship, based on virtue, utility, and pleasantness, these again are subdivided each into two, one kind based on equality, the other on superiority. Both are friendships, but only those between whom there is equality are friends. It would be absurd for a man to be the friend of a child, yet certainly he loves, and is loved by him. Sometimes the superior ought to be loved, but if he loves he is reproached for loving one undeserving, for measurement is made by the worth of the friends, and a sort of, i.e., proportional equality. Some then, owing to inferiority in age, do not deserve to receive an equal love, and others because of virtue or birth or some other such superiority possessed by the other person. The superior ought to claim either not to return the love, or not to return it in the same measure, whether in the friendship of utility, pleasure, or virtue. Where the superiority is small, disputes naturally arise, for the small is in some cases of no account, e.g., in weighing wood, though not in weighing gold. But men judge wrongly what is small, for their own good by its nearness seems great, that of another by its distance small. But when the difference is excessive, then not even those affected seek to make out that their love should be returned, or equally returned, e.g., as if a man were to claim this from God. It is clear then that men are friends when on an equality with each other, but we may have return of love without their being friends. and it is clear why men seek the friendship of superiority rather than that of equality. For in the former they obtain both love and superiority. Therefore with some the flatterer is more valued than the friend, for he procures the appearance of both love and superiority for the object of his flattery. The ambitious are especially of this kind, for to be an object of admiration involves superiority. By nature some grow up loving, and others ambitious. The former is one who delights rather in loving than in being loved, the other is rather fond of honour. He then who delights in being loved and admired really loves superiority, the other, the loving, is fond of the pleasure of loving. This, by his mere activity of loving, he must have, for to be loved is an accident. One may be loved without knowing it, but not love. Loving, rather than being loved, depends on lovingness. Being loved, rather, depends on the nature of the object of love. And here is a proof. The friend or lover would choose, if both were not possible, rather to know than to be known, as we see women do when allowing others to adopt their children, e.g., Antiphon's Andromache. For wishing to be known seems to be felt on one's own account, and in order to get, not to do, some good. But wishing to know is felt in order that one may do and love. Therefore we praise those who persist in their love towards the dead, for they know but are not known. That then there are several sorts of friendship, that they are three in number, and what are the differences between being loved and having love returned, and between friends on an equality and friends in a relation of superiority and inferiority, has now been stated. Chapter 5. But since friendly is also used more universally, as was indeed said at the beginning, by those who take in extraneous considerations, some saying that the like is friendly, and some the contrary, we must speak also of the relation of these friendships to those previously mentioned. The like is brought both under the pleasant and under the good. For the good is simple, but the bad various in form, and the good man is ever like himself and does not change in character, but the bad and the foolish are quite different in the evening from what they were in the morning. Therefore, unless the bad come to some agreement, they are not friends to one another, but are parted. But unstable friendship is not friendship. So thus the like is friendly, because the good is like. But it may also be friendly because of pleasure. For those like one another have the same pleasures, and everything too is by nature pleasant to itself. Therefore the voices, habits, and company of those of the same species are pleasantest to each side, even in the animals other than man. And in this way it is possible for even the bad to love one another. Pleasure glues the bad to the bad. But opposites are friendly through usefulness, for the like is useless to itself. Therefore master needs slave, and slave master. Man and wife need one another, and the opposite is pleasant and desired qua useful, not as included in the end, but as a means towards it. For when a thing has obtained what it desires, it has reached its end, and no longer desires the opposite. E.g., heat does not desire cold, nor dryness moisture. Yet in a sense the love of the contrary is love of the good, for the opposites desire one another because of the mean. They desire one another like tallies, because thus out of the two arises a single mean. Further, the love is accidentally of the opposite, but per se of the mean, for opposites desire not one another, but the mean. For if over-chilled, they return to the mean by being warmed, and if over-warmed, by being chilled. And so with everything else. Otherwise they are ever desiring, never in the mean states. But that which is in the mean delights without desire in what is naturally pleasant, while the others delight in all that puts them out of their natural condition. This kind of relation, then, is found also among inanimate things, but love occurs when the relation is found among the living. Therefore some delight in what is unlike themselves, the rigid in the witty, the energetic in the lazy, for they reduce each other to the mean state. Accidentally, then, as has been said, opposites are friendly because of the good. The number, then, of kinds of friendship, and the different senses in which we speak of friends, and of persons as loving and loved, both where this constitutes friendship and where it does not, have now been stated. End of chapter 5 of Book 7. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 6 of Book 7 of Eudemian Ethics by Aristotle. Translated by J. Solomon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 6. The question whether a man is a friend to himself or not requires much inquiry, for some think that every man is above all a friend to himself, and they use this friendship as a canon by which to test his friendship to all other friends. If we look to argument, and to the properties usually thought characteristic of friends, then the two kinds of friendship are in some of these respects opposed to one another, but in others alike. For this friendship, that to oneself, is, in a way, friendship by analogy, not absolutely. For loving and being loved requires two separate individuals. Therefore a man is a friend to himself rather in the sense in which we have described the incontinent and continent as willing or unwilling, namely in the sense that the parts of his soul are in a certain relation to each other, and all problems of this sort have a similar explanation, e.g., whether a man can be a friend or enemy to himself, and whether a man can wrong himself. For all these relations require two separate individuals. So far, then, as the soul is two, these relations can in a sense belong to it. So far as these two are not separate, the relations cannot belong to it. By a man's attitude to himself, the other modes of friendship, under which we are accustomed to consider friendship in this discourse, are determined. For a man seems to us a friend who wishes the good, or what he thinks to be such, to some one, not on his own account, but for the sake of that other. Or in another way, if he wishes for another man existence, even if he is not bestowing goods, still less existence, on that other's account, and not on his own, he would seem most of all to be a friend to him. And in yet another manner he would be a friend to him whom he wishes to live with merely for the sake of his company and for no other reason. Thus fathers wish the existence of their sons, but prefer to live with others. Now these various ways of friendship are discordant with one another, for some think they are not loved unless the other wishes them this or that good, some unless their existence or their society is desired. Further, to sorrow with the sorrowing, for no other reason than their sorrow, we shall regard as love, e.g., slaves towards their masters feel grief because their masters when in trouble are cruel to them, not for the sake of the masters themselves. As mothers feel towards their children, and birds that share one another's pains. For the friend wants, if possible, not merely to feel pain along with his friend, but to feel the same pain, e.g., to feel thirsty when he is thirsty, if that were possible, and if not, then to feel a pain as like as possible. The same words are applicable to joy, which, if felt for no other reason than that the other feels joy, is a sign of friendship. Further, we say about friendship such things as that friendship is equality, and true friends a single soul. all such phrases point back to the single individual, for a man wishes good to himself in this fashion. For no one benefits himself for some further reason, or speaks well of himself for a certain consideration, because his action is that of an individual. For he who shows that he loves wishes not to love, but to be thought to love, and wishing the existence above all of the friend, living with him, sharing his joy and his grief, unity of soul with the friend, the impossibility of even living without one another, and the dying together are characteristic of a single individual. For such is the condition of the individual, and he is perhaps company to himself. All these characters, then, we find in the relation of the good man to himself. In the bad man, e.g. the incontinent, there is variance, and for this reason it seems possible for a man to be at enmity with himself. But so far as he is single and indivisible, he is an object of desire to himself. Such is the good man, the man whose friendship is based on virtue, for the wicked man is not one but many, in the same day other than himself and fickle. So that a man's friendship for himself is at bottom friendship towards the good. For because a man is in a sense like himself, single, and good for himself, so far he is a friend and object of desire to himself, and this is natural to man, but the bad man is unnatural. The good man never finds fault with himself at the moment of his act, like the incontinent, nor the later with the earlier man, like the penitent, nor the earlier with the later, like the liar. Generally, if it is necessary to distinguish, as the Sophists do, he is related to himself as koriskos to good koriskos. For it is clear that some identical portion of them is good, for when they blame themselves, they kill themselves. But every one seems good to himself. But the man that is good absolutely seeks to be a friend to himself, as has been said, since he has within him two parts which by nature desire to be friends, and which it is impossible to tear apart. Therefore, in the case of man, each is thought to be the friend of himself, but not so with the other animals, e.g. the horse is himself to himself, therefore not a friend. Nor are children till they have attained the power of deliberate choice, for already then the mind is at variance with the appetite. One's friendship to oneself resembles the friendship arising from kinship, for neither bond can be dissolved by one's own power, but even if they quarrel, the kinsmen remain kinsmen, and so the man remains one so long as he lives. The various senses, then, of loving, and how all friendships reduce to the primary kind, is clear from what has been said. Chapter 7. It is appropriate to the inquiry to study agreement of feeling and kindly feeling, for some identify these, and others think they cannot exist apart. Now, kindly feeling is not altogether different from friendship, nor yet the same. For when we distinguish friendship according to its three sorts, kindly feeling is found neither in the friendship of usefulness, nor in that of pleasure. For if one wishes well to the other because that is useful to one, one would be so wishing, not for the object's sake, but for his own. But goodwill seems like to be not for the sake of him who feels the goodwill, but for the sake of him towards whom it is felt. But if goodwill existed in the friendship towards the pleasant, then men would feel goodwill towards things inanimate. So that it is clear that goodwill is concerned with the friendship that depends on character, but goodwill shows itself in merely wishing, friendship in also doing what one wishes. For goodwill is the beginning of friendship. Every friend has goodwill, but not all who have goodwill are friends. He who has goodwill only is like a man at the beginning, and therefore it is the beginning of friendship, not friendship itself. For friends seem to agree in feeling, and those who agree in feeling seem to be friends. friendly agreement is not about all things, but only about things that may be done by those in agreement, and what relates to their common life. Nor is it agreement merely in thought, or merely in desire, for it is possible to know one thing and desire the opposite, as in the incontinent the motives disagree. Nor if a man agrees with another in deliberate choice, does he necessarily agree in desire. Agreement is only found in the case of good men. At least, bad men, when they choose and desire the same things, harm one another. Agreement, like friendship, does not appear to have a single meaning, but still in its primary and natural form it is morally good, and so the bad cannot agree. The agreement of the bad, when they choose and desire the same things, is something different, and the two parties must so desire the same thing that it is possible for both to get what they desire. For if they desire that which cannot belong to both, they will quarrel, but those in agreement will not quarrel. There is agreement when the two parties make the same choice as to who is to rule, who to be ruled, meaning by the same, not that each one should choose himself, but that both should choose the same person. Agreement is the friendship of fellow citizens. So much then about agreement and goodwill. Chapter 8. It is disputed why benefactors are more fond of the benefited than the benefited of their benefactors. The opposite seems to be just. One might suppose it happens from consideration of utility and what is profitable to oneself, for the benefactor has a debt due to him, while the benefited has to repay a debt. This, however, is not all. The reason is partly the general natural principle: activity is more desirable. There is the same relation between the effect and the activity, the benefited being, as it were, an effect or creation of the benefactor. Hence, in animals, their strong feeling for their children, both in begetting them and in preserving them afterwards. And so fathers love their children, and still more mothers, more than they are loved by them. And these again love their own children more than their parents, because nothing is so good as activity. In fact, mothers love more than fathers, because they think the children to be more their own creation. For the amount of work is measured by the difficulty, and the mother suffers more in birth. So much then for friendship towards oneself, and among more than one. Chapter 9. But both justice seems to be a sort of equality, and friendship also involves equality, if the saying is not wrong that love is equality. Now, constitutions are all of them a particular form of justice, for a constitution is a partnership, and every partnership rests on justice, so that whatever be the number of species of friendship, there are the same of justice and partnership. These all border on one another, and the species of one have differences akin to those of the other. But since there is the same relation between soul and body, artisan and tool, and master and slave, between each of these pairs there is no partnership, for they are not two. But the first term in each is one, and the second a part of this one, but not itself one. Nor is the good to be divided between the two, but that of both belongs to the one, for the sake of which the pair exists. For the body is the soul's congenital tool, while the slave is, as it were, a part and detachable tool of the master, the tool being a sort of inanimate slave. The other partnerships are a part of the civic partnership, e.g., those of the phratries and priestly colleges, or pecuniary partnerships. All constitutions are found together in the household, both the true and the corrupt forms, for the same thing is true in constitutions as of harmonies. The government of the children by the father is royal, the relation of husband and wife aristocratic, the relation of brothers that of a commonwealth. The corruption of these three are tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. The forms of justice, then, are also so many in number. But since equality is either numerical or proportional, there will be various species of justice, friendship, and partnership. On numerical equality rests the commonwealth and the friendship of comrades, both being measured by the same standard. On proportional, the aristocratic, which is best, and the royal. For the same thing is not just for the superior and the inferior. What is proportional is just. Such is the friendship between father and child, and the same sort of thing may be seen in partnerships. Chapter 10. We speak of friendships of kinsmen, comrades, partners, the so-called civic friendship. That of kinsmen has more than one species, that of brothers, that of father and sons. There is the friendship based on proportion, as that of the father to his children, and that based on mere number, e.g., that of brothers. For this latter resembles the friendship of comrades, for here too age gives certain privileges. Civic friendship has been established mainly in accordance with utility, for men seem to have come together because each is not sufficient for himself, though they would have come together anyhow for the sake of living in company. Only the civic friendship and its parallel corruption are not merely friendships, but the partnership is that of friends. Other friendships rest on the relation of superiority. The justice belonging to the friendship of those useful to one another is preeminently justice, for it is civic or political justice. The concurrence of the saw and the art that uses it is of another sort, for it is not for some end common to both. It is like instrument and soul, but for the sake of the user. It is true that the tool itself receives attention, and it is just that it should receive it, for its function, that is, for it exists for the sake of its function. And the essence of a gimlet is twofold, but more properly it is its activity, namely, boring. In this class come the body and a slave, as has been said before. To inquire, then, how to behave to a friend is to look for a particular kind of justice, for generally all justice is in relation to a friend. For justice involves a number of individuals who are partners, and the friend is a partner either in family or in one scheme of life. For man is not merely a political, but also a household-maintaining animal, and his unions are not, like those of the other animals, confined to certain times, and formed with any chance partner, whether male or female. But in a special sense man is not a lonely being, but has a tendency to partnership with those to whom he is by nature akin. There would then be partnership and a kind of justice, even if there were no state, and the household is a kind of friendship. The relation, indeed, of master and servant is that of an art and its tools, a soul and its body, and these are not friendships, nor forms of justice, but something similar to justice, just as health is not justice, but something similar. But the friendship of man and wife is a friendship based on utility. A partnership, that of father and son, is the same as that of God to man, of the benefactor to the benefited, and in general of the natural ruler to the natural subject. That of brothers to one another is eminently that of comrades, inasmuch as it involves equality. For I was not declared a bastard brother to him, but the same Zeus, my king, was called the father of both of us. For this is the language of men that seek equality. Therefore in the household first we have the sources and springs of friendship, of political organization, and of justice. But since there are three sorts of friendship, based on virtue, utility, and pleasantness respectively, and two varieties of each of these, for each of them may imply either superiority or equality, and the justice involved in these is clear from the debates that have been held on it, in a friendship between superior and inferior the claim for proportion takes different forms, the superior's claim being one for inverse proportion, i.e., as he is to the inferior, so should what he receives from the inferior be to what the inferior receives from him, he being in the position of ruler to subject, if he cannot get that, he demands at least numerical equality. For so it is in the other associations, the two members enjoying an equality sometimes of number, sometimes of ratio. For if they contribute numerically equal sums of money, they divide an equal amount, and by an equal number; if not equal sums, then they divide proportionally. But the inferior inverts this proportion and joins crosswise. But in this way the superior would seem to come off the worse, and friendship and partnership to be a gratuitous burden. Equality must then be restored, and proportion created by some other means, and this means is honour, which by nature belongs to a ruler or god in relation to a subject. The profit and the honour must be equated. But civic friendship is that resting on equality. It is based on utility, and just as cities are friends to one another, so in the like way are citizens. The Athenians no longer know the Megarians, nor do citizens one another when they are no longer useful to one another, and the friendship is merely a temporary one for a particular exchange of goods. There is here, too, the relation of ruler and subject, which is neither the natural relation, nor that involved in kingship, but each is ruler and ruled in turn. Nor is it either's purpose to act with the free beneficence of a god, but that he may share equally in the good and in the burdensome service. Civic friendship, then, claims to be one based on equality. But of the friendship of utility there are two kinds, the strictly legal and the moral. Civic friendship looks to equality and to the object as sellers and buyers do, hence the proverb, a fixed wage for a friend. When, then, friendship proceeds by contract, it is of the civic and strictly legal kind. But when each of the two parties leaves the return for his services to be fixed by the other, we have the moral friendship, that of comrades. Therefore recrimination is very frequent in this sort of friendship, and the reason is that it is unnatural, for friendships based on utility and based on virtue are different. But these wish to have both together, associating together really for the sake of utility, but representing their friendship as moral, like that of good men. Pretending to trust one another, they make out their friendship to be not merely legal. For in general there are more recriminations in the useful friendship than in either of the other two, for virtue is not given to recrimination, and pleasant friends, having got what they wanted and given what they had, are done with it. But useful friends do not dissolve their association at once, if their relations are not merely legal, but those of comrades. Still, the legal form of useful friendship is free from recrimination. The legal association is dissolved by a money payment, for it measures equality in money. But the moral is dissolved by voluntary consent. Therefore, in some countries the law forbids lawsuits for voluntary transactions between those who associate thus as friends, and rightly, for good men do not go to law with one another, and such as these have dealings with one another as good men themselves, and dealing with men who can be trusted. In this kind of friendship it is uncertain how either will recriminate on the other, seeing that they trust each other, not in a limited legal way, but on the basis of their characters. It is a further problem on which of two grounds we are to determine what is just, whether by looking to the amount of the service rendered, or to what was its character for the recipient. For, to borrow the language of Theognis, the service may be small to thee, O goddess, but great to me. Or the opposite may happen, as in the saying, this is sport to you, but death to me. Hence, as we have said, come recriminations. For the benefactor claims a return on the ground of having done a great service, because he has done it at the request of the other, or with some other plea of the great value of the benefit to the other's interest, saying nothing about what it was to himself, while the recipient insists on its value to the benefactor, not on its value to himself. Sometimes the receiver inverts the position, insisting how little the benefit has turned out to him, while the doer insists on its great magnitude to him, e.g., If at considerable risk one has benefited another to the extent of a drachma, the one insists on the greatness of the risk, the other on the smallness of the money, just as in the repayment of money, for there the dispute is on this point. The one claims the value of it when it was lent, the other concedes only the value of it now when it is returned, unless they have made an explicit provision in the contract. Civic friendship, then, looks to the agreement and the thing, moral friendship to the purpose. Here, then, we have more truly justice, and a friendly justice. The reason of the quarrel is that moral friendship is more noble, but useful friendship more necessary. Men come then proposing to be moral friends, i.e. friends through virtue, but when some private interest stands in the way, they show clearly they were not so. For the multitude aim at the noble only when they have plenty of everything else, and at noble friendship similarly, so that it is clear what distinctions should be drawn in these matters. If the two are moral friends, we must look to see if the purpose of each is equal, and then nothing more should be claimed by either from the other. But if their friendship is of the useful or civic kind, we must consider what would have been profitable lines for an agreement. And if one declares that they are friends on one basis, but the other on the other, it is not honourable if one ought to do something in return, merely to use fine language, and so too in the other case. But since they have not declared their friendship a moral friendship, some one must be made judge, so that neither cheats the other by a false pretense, and so each must put up with his luck. But that moral friendship is based on purpose is clear, since even if after receiving great benefits one does not repay them through inability, but repays only to the extent of his ability, he acts honourably, and God is satisfied at getting sacrifices as good as our power allows. But a seller of goods will not be satisfied if the buyer says he cannot pay more, nor will a lender of money. Recriminations are common in dissimilar friendships, where action and reaction are not in the same straight line, and it is not easy to see what is just, for it is hard to measure by just this one unit different directions. We find this in the relation of lovers, for there the one pursues the other as the one pleasant person, in order to live with him, while the latter seeks the other at times for his utility. When the love is over, one changes as the other changes. Then they calculate the quid pro quo. Thus Python and Pomenes quarrelled, and so in general do teacher and pupil, for knowledge and money have no common measure. And so Herodicus, the doctor, quarrelled with a patient who paid him only a small fee. Such, too, was the case of the king and the lyre-player. The former regarded his associate as pleasant, the latter his as useful. And so the king, when he had to pay, chose to regard himself as an associate of the pleasant kind, and said that just as the player had given him pleasure by singing, so he had given the player pleasure by his promise. But it is clear here too how one should decide. The measurement must be by one measure, only here not by a number, but by a ratio. We must measure by proportion, just as one measures in the associations of citizens. For how is a cobbler to have dealings with a farmer, unless one equates the work of the two by proportion? So too, all whose exchanges are not of the same for the same, proportion is the measure, e.g. if the one complains that he has given wisdom, and the other that he has given money, we must measure first the ratio of wisdom to wealth, and then what has been given for each. For if the one gives half of the lesser, and the other does not give even a small fraction of the greater object, it is clear that the latter does injustice. Here too there may be a dispute at the start, if one party pretends they have come together for use, and the other denies this, and alleges that they have met from some other kind of friendship. Chapter 11. As regards the good man who is loved for his virtue, we must consider whether we ought to render useful services and help to him, or to one who makes a return and has power. This is the same problem as whether we ought rather to benefit a friend or a virtuous man. For if a man is both virtuous and a friend, there is perhaps no great difficulty, if one does not exaggerate the one quality and minimize the other, making him very much of a friend, but not much of a good man. But in other cases many problems arise, e.g. if the one has been, but will no longer remain so, and the other will be, but is not yet, what he is going to be, or the one was but is not, and the other is but has not been and will not be. But the other is a harder question, for perhaps Euripides is right in saying, a word is your just pay for a word, but a deed for him who has given deeds, and one must not do everything for one's father, but there are some things also one should do for one's mother, though a father is the better of the two. For indeed, even to Zeus we do not sacrifice all things, nor does he have all honours, but only some. Perhaps then there are things which should be rendered to the useful friend, and others to the good one, e.g. because a man gives you food and what is necessary, you need not give him your society, nor therefore need you give the man to whom you grant your society that which not he but the useful friend gives. Those who doing this give all to the object of their love, when they ought not, are worthless. And the various definitions of friendship that we give in our discourse all belong to friendship in some sense, but not to the same friendship. To the useful friend applies the fact that one wishes what is good for him, and to a benefactor, and in fact to any kind of friend, for this definition does not distinguish the class of friendship. To another we should wish existence, of another we should wish the society. To the friend on the basis of pleasure, sympathy in joy and grief is the proper gift. All these definitions are appropriate to some friendship, but none to a single unique thing, friendship. Hence there are many definitions, and each appears to belong to a single unique thing, viz. Friendship, though really it does not, e.g. the purpose to maintain the friend's existence. For the superior friend and benefactor wishes the existence of that which he has made, and to him who has given one existence, one ought to give it in return, but not necessarily one's society. That gift is for the pleasant friend. Some friends wrong one another. They love rather the things than the possessor of them, and so they love the persons much as they choose wine because it is pleasant, or wealth because it is useful, for wealth is more useful than its owner. Therefore the owner is indignant, as if the other had preferred his wealth to him as to something inferior. But the other side complain in turn, for they now look to find in him a good man, when before they looked for one pleasant or useful. End of chapter 11 of book 7. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Of Book 7 of Eudemian Ethics by Aristotle, translated by J. Solomon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 12. We must also consider about independence and friendship, and the relations they have to one another. For one might doubt whether, if a man be in all respects independent, he will have a friend, if one seeks a friend from want, and the good man is perfectly independent. If the possessor of virtue is happy, why should he need a friend? For the independent man neither needs useful people, nor people to cheer him, nor society. His own society is enough for him. This is most plain in the case of a god, for it is clear that, needing nothing, he will not need a friend, nor have one, supposing that he does not need one, so that the happiest man will least need a friend, and only as far as it is impossible for him to be independent. Therefore the man who lives the best life must have fewest friends, and they must always be becoming fewer, and he must show no eagerness for men to become his friends, but despise not merely the useful, but even men desirable for society. But surely this makes it all the clearer that the friend is not for use or help, but that the friend through virtue is the only friend. For when we need nothing, then we all seek others to share our enjoyment, those whom we may benefit rather than those who will benefit us. And we judge better when independent than when in want, and most of all we then seek friends worthy to be lived with. But as to this problem, we must see if we have not been partially right, and partially missed the truth owing to our illustration. It will be clear if we ascertain what is life in its active sense, and as end. Clearly it is perception and knowledge, and therefore life in society is perception and knowledge in common, and mere perception and mere knowledge is most desirable to everyone, and hence the desire of living is congenital in all, for living must be regarded as a kind of knowledge. If then we were to cut off and abstract mere knowledge and its opposite, this passes unnoticed in the argument, as we have given it, but in fact need not remain unnoticed. There would be no difference between this and another's knowing instead of oneself, and this is like another's living instead of oneself. But naturally the perception and knowledge of oneself is more desirable. For we must take two things into consideration, that life is desirable, and also the good, and thence that it is desirable that such a nature should belong to oneself as belongs to them. If then of such a pair of corresponding series there is always one series of the desirable, and the known and the perceived are in general constituted by their participation in the nature of the determined, so that to wish to perceive oneself is to wish oneself to be of a certain definite character. Since then we are not in ourselves possessed of each of such characters, but only by participation in these qualities in perceiving and knowing, for the perceiver becomes perceived in that way, and in that respect in which he first perceives, and according to the way in which, and the object which he perceives, and the knower becomes known in the same way. Therefore it is for this reason that one always desires to live, because one always desires to know, and this is because he himself wishes to be the object known. The choice to live with others might seem, from a certain point of view, silly. First, in the case of things common also to the other animals, e.g., eating together, drinking together, for what is the difference between doing these things in the neighbourhood of others, or apart from them, if you take away speech? But even to share in speech of a casual kind does not make the case different. Further, for friends who are self-dependent, neither teaching nor learning is possible, for if one learns, he is not as he should be, and if he teaches, his friend is not, and likeness is friendship. But surely it is obviously so, and all of us find greater pleasure in sharing good things with friends as far as these come to each, I mean the greatest good one can share. But to some it falls to share in bodily delights, to others in artistic contemplation, to others in philosophy. And the friend must be present too, whence the proverb, distant friends are a burden. So that men must not be at a distance from one another when there is friendship between them. Hence sensuous love seems like friendship, for the lover aims at the society of his beloved, but not as ideally he ought, but in a merely sensuous way. The argument, then, says what we have before mentioned, raising difficulties. But the facts are, as we saw later, so that it is clear that the objector is in a way misleading us. We must see the truth from this. A friend wants to be, in the words of the proverb, another Heracles, a second self. But he is severed from his friend, and it is hard to find in two people the characteristics of a single individual. But though a friend is by nature what is most akin to his friend, one man is like another in body, and another like him in soul, and one like him in one part of the body or soul, and another like him in another. but none the less does a friend wish to be, as it were, a separate self. Therefore, to perceive a friend must be in a way to perceive oneself and to know oneself, so that even the vulgar forms of pleasure and life in the society of a friend are naturally pleasant, for perception of the friend always takes place at the same time, but still more the communion in the diviner pleasures, and the reason is that it is always pleasanter to see oneself enjoying the superior good. And this is sometimes a passion, sometimes an action, sometimes something else. But if it is pleasant for a man himself to live well, and also his friend, and in their common life to engage in mutually helpful activity, their partnership surely would be above all in things included in the end. Therefore men should contemplate in common, and feast in common, only not on the pleasures of food, or on necessary pleasures. Such society does not seem to be true society, but sensuous enjoyment. But the end which each can attain is that in which he desires the society of another. If that is not possible, men desire to benefit, and be benefited by friends, in preference to others. That society then is right, that all wish it above all things, and that the happiest and best man tends especially to do so, is clear. But that the contrary appeared as the conclusion of the argument was also reasonable, since the argument said what was true. For it is in respect of the comparison of the two cases that the solution is found, the case compared being in itself truly enough stated. For because God is not such as to need a friend, the argument claims the same of the man who resembles God. But by this reasoning the virtuous man will not even think, for the perfection of God is not in this, but in being superior to thinking of aught beside himself. The reason is, that with us welfare involves a something beyond us, but the Deity is his own well-being. As to our seeking and praying for many friends, while we say that the man who has many friends has no friend, both are correct. For if it is possible to live with and share the perceptions of many at the same time, it is most desirable that these should be as numerous as possible. But since this is most difficult, the activity of joint perception must exist among fewer, so that it is not only hard to get many friends, for probation is necessary, but also to use them when you have got them. Sometimes we wish the object of our love to be happy away from us, sometimes to share the same fortune as ourselves. The wish to be together is characteristic of friendship. For if the two can be together and be happy, all choose this. But if they cannot be both, then we choose as the mother of Heracles might have chosen, e.g., that her son should be a god, rather than in her company, but a serf to Eurystheus. One might say something like the jesting remark of the Laconian, when some one bade him in a storm to summon the Dioscuri. Footnote: he doubtless said that being in trouble himself, he did not wish to involve the Dioscuri in it. End footnote. It appears to be the mark of one who loves to keep the object of his love from sharing in hardships, but of the beloved to wish to share them. The conduct of both is reasonable. For nothing ought to be so painful to a friend as his friend should be pleasant to him. But it is thought that he ought not to choose what is for his own interest. Therefore men keep their friends from participation in their calamities. Their own suffering is enough, that they may not show themselves studying their own interest, and choosing joy at the cost of a friend's pain, or relief by not bearing their troubles alone. But since both well-being and participation are desirable, it is clear that participation with a smaller good is more desirable than to enjoy a greater good in solitude. But since the weight to be attached to participation is not ascertained, men differ, and some think that participation in all things at once is the mark of friendship, e.g., they say that it is better to dine together than separately, though having the same food. Others wish them to share prosperity, since they say, if one takes extreme cases, great adversity in company is on par with great prosperity enjoyed alone. We have something similar in the case of ill fortune, for sometimes we wish our friends to be absent, and we wish to give them no pain, when they are not going to be of any use to us. At another time we find it pleasantest for them to be present. But this contradiction is quite reasonable, for this happens in consequence of what we have mentioned above, and because we often simply avoid the sight of a friend in pain, or in bad condition, as we should the sight of ourselves so placed. Yet to see a friend is as pleasant as anything can be, because of the above-mentioned cause, and indeed to see him ill is pleasant if you are ill yourself, so that whichever of these two is the pleasanter decides us whether to wish the friend present or not. This also happens for the same reason in the case of the worst sort of men, for they are most anxious that their friends should not fare well, nor even exist, if they themselves have to fare badly. Therefore some kill the objects of their love with themselves, for they think that if the objects of their love are to survive, they perceive their own trouble more acutely, just as one who remembered that once he had been happy would feel it more than if he thought himself to be always unhappy. Chapter 13. Here one might raise a question. One can use each thing both for its natural purpose and otherwise, and either per se, or again per accidens, as for instance, one might use the eye as eye for seeing, and also for falsely seeing by squinting, so that one thing appears as two. Both these uses are due to the eye being an eye, but it was possible to use the eye in another way, per accidens, e.g., if one could sell or eat it. Knowledge may be used similarly. It is possible to use it really, or to do what is wrong, e.g., when a man voluntarily writes incorrectly, to make knowledge into ignorance for the time, as dancing girls sometimes exchange the uses of the hand and the foot, and use the foot as a hand, and the hand as a foot. If then all the virtues are kinds of knowledge, one might use justice also as injustice, and so one would be unjust and do unjust actions from justice, as ignorant things may be done from knowledge. But if this is impossible, it is clear that the virtues are not species of knowledge, and even if ignorance cannot proceed from knowledge, but only error and the doing of the same things as proceed from ignorance, it must be remembered that from justice one will not act as from injustice, but since prudence is knowledge and something true, it may behave like knowledge. One might act imprudently, though possessed of prudence, and commit the errors of the imprudent. But if the use of each thing as such were single, then in so acting men would still be acting prudently. Over other kinds of knowledge, then, there is something superior that diverts them. But how can there be any knowledge that diverts the highest knowledge of all? There is no longer any knowledge or intuitive reason to do this. But neither can virtue do it, for prudence uses that, for the virtue of the ruling part uses that of the subject. Who is there then whose prudence is thus diverted? Perhaps the position is like that of incontinence, which is said to be a vice of the irrational part of the soul. The incontinent man is, in a sense, intemperate. He has reason, but supposing appetite to be strong, it will twist him, and he will draw the opposite conclusion. Or is it an obvious consequence that, similarly, if there is virtue in the irrational part, but folly in the rational, they are transformed in yet another way? Thus it will be possible to use justice unjustly and badly, and prudence foolishly, and therefore the opposite uses will also be possible. For it is absurd that vice occurring sometimes in the irrational part should twist the virtue in the rational part, and make the man ignorant, but that virtue in the irrational part, when folly is present in the rational, should not divert the latter, and make the man judge prudently, and as is right. And again, prudence in the rational part should not make the intemperance in the irrational part act temperately. This seems the very essence of continence. And therefore we shall also get prudent action arising out of ignorance. But all these consequences are absurd, especially that of acting prudently out of ignorance, for we certainly do not see this in any other case. E.g., intemperance perverts one's medical or grammatical knowledge. But at any rate we may say that not ignorance, if opposite, for it has no superiority, but virtue is rather related in this way to vice in general. For whatever the unjust can do, the just can do, and in general powerlessness is covered by power. And so it is clear that prudence and virtue go together, and that those complex states are states of one in whom prudence and virtue are not combined. And the Socratic saying that nothing is stronger than prudence is right. But when Socrates said this of knowledge, he was wrong. For prudence is virtue, and not scientific knowledge, but another kind of cognition. Chapter 14. But since not only prudence and virtue produce well-doing, but we say also that the fortunate do well, thus assuming that good fortune produces well-doing, and the same results as knowledge, we must inquire whether it is or is not by nature that one man is fortunate, another not, and what is the truth about these things. For that there are fortunate men we see, who, though silly, are often successful in matters controlled by fortune. Some also in matters involving art, but into which chance largely enters, e.g., strategy and navigation. Does their success, then, arise from some acquired mental condition, or do they effect fortunate results not because of their own acquired qualities at all? At present men take the latter view, regarding them as having some special natural endowment. Does nature rather make men with different qualities so that they differ from birth, as some are blue-eyed and some black-eyed because they have some particular part of a particular nature, so are some lucky and others unlucky? For that they do not succeed through prudence is clear, for prudence is not irrational, but can give a reason why it acts as it does. But they could not say why they succeed. That would be art. Further, it is clear that they succeed, though imprudent, and not merely imprudent about other things. That would not be strange at all. E.g., Hippocrates was a geometer, but in other respects was thought foolish and imprudent, and once on a voyage was robbed of much money by the customs collectors at Byzantium, owing to his silliness, as we are told. But imprudent in the very business in which they are lucky. For in navigation not the cleverest are the most fortunate, but it is as in throwing dice, where one throws nothing, another throws something, so a man is lucky according as nature determines. Or is it because he is loved, as the phrase is, by a god, success being something coming from without, as a worse-built vessel often sails better, not owing to itself, but because it has a good pilot? But if so, the fortunate man has a good pilot, namely the divinity. But it is absurd that a god or divinity should love such a man, and not the best and most prudent. If then success must be due either to nature or intelligence, or some sort of protection, and the latter two causes are out of the question, then the fortunate must be so by nature. But on the other hand, nature is the cause of the absolutely uniform, or of the usual, fortune the opposite. If then it is thought that unexpected success is due to chance, but that if it is through chance that one is fortunate, the cause of his fortune is not the sort of cause that produces always or usually the same result. Further, if a person succeeds or fails because he is a certain sort of man, just as a man sees badly because he is blue-eyed, then it follows that not fortune but nature is the cause. The man, then, is not fortunate, but rather naturally gifted. So we must say that the people we call fortunate are not so through fortune. Therefore they are not fortunate, for those goods only are in the disposal of fortune of which good fortune is the cause. But if this is so, shall we say that fortune does not exist at all, or that it exists but is not a cause? No, it must both exist and be a cause. It will then also cause good or evil to certain people. But whether it is to be wholly removed, and we ought to say that nothing happens by chance, but do say that chance is a cause simply because, though there is some other cause, we do not see it, and therefore in defining chance, some make it a cause incalculable to human reasoning, taking it to be a genuine reality. This would be matter for another inquiry. But since we see people who are fortunate once only, why should they not be fortunate a second time for the same reason, and a third time? For the same antecedent is cause of the same consequent. Then this cannot be a matter of chance. But when the same event follows from indefinite and undetermined antecedents, it will be for a particular man good or evil. But there will not be the science that comes by experience of it, since otherwise some lucky people would have learned it, or even, as Socrates said, all the sciences would have been kinds of good luck. What then prevents such things happening to a man often in succession, not because he has a certain character, but as, say, dice might continually throw a lucky number? But again, are there not in the soul impulses, some from reason and others from irrational desire, the latter being the earlier? For if the impulse arising from appetite for the pleasant is natural, the desire also would by nature march in each case towards the good. If then some have a fortunate natural endowment, as musical people, though they have not learned to sing, are fortunately endowed in this way, and move without reason in the direction given them by their nature, and desire that which they ought at the time and in the manner they ought, such men are successful even if they are foolish and irrational, just as the others will sing well, though not able to teach singing. And such men are fortunate, namely those who generally succeed without the aid of reason. Men, then, who are fortunate will be so by nature. Perhaps, however, good fortune is a phrase with several senses. For some things are done from impulse and are due to deliberate choice, and others not, but the opposite. And if in the former cases they succeed where they seem to have reasoned badly, we say that they have been lucky, and again in the latter cases, if they wished for a different good or less of the good than they got. Men who are lucky in the former way, then, may be fortunate by nature, for the impulse and desire was for the right object, and succeeded, but the reasoning was silly, and people in this case, when it happens that their reasoning seems incorrect, but desire is the cause of their reasoning, are saved by the rightness of their desire. But on another occasion a man reasons again in this way owing to appetite, and turns out unfortunate. But in the other cases, how can the good luck be due to a natural goodness in desire and appetite? But surely the good fortune and chance spoken of here and in the other case are the same, or else there is more than one sort of good fortune, and chance has two meanings. But since we see some men lucky contrary to all knowledge and right reasonings, it is clear that the cause of luck must be something different from these. But is it luck or not by which a man desires what and when he ought, though for him human reasoning could not lead to this? For that is not altogether unreasonable, whereof the desire is natural, though reason is misled by something. The man, then, is thought to have good luck, because luck is the cause of things contrary to reason, and this is contrary to reason, for it is contrary to science and the universal. But probably it does not spring from chance, but seems so for the above reason. So that this argument shows not that good luck is due to nature, but that not all who seem to be lucky are successful owing to fortune, but rather owing to nature. Nor does it show that there is no such thing as fortune, nor that fortune is not the cause of anything, but only not of all that it seems to be the cause of. This, however, one might question, whether fortune is the cause of just this, viz., desiring what and when one ought. But will it not in this case be the cause of everything, even of thought and deliberation? For one does not deliberate after previous deliberation, which itself presupposed deliberation, but there is some starting point. Nor does one think after thinking previously to thinking, and so ad infinitum. Thought, then, is not the starting point of thinking, nor deliberation of deliberation. What, then, can be the starting point except chance? Thus everything would come from chance. Perhaps there is a starting point with none other outside it, and this can act in this sort of way by being such as it is. The object of our search is this: what is the commencement of movement in the soul? The answer is clear. As in the universe, so in the soul, God moves everything. For in a sense the divine element in us moves everything. The starting point of reasoning is not reasoning, but something greater. What then could be greater even than knowledge and intellect, but God? Not virtue, for virtue is an instrument of the intellect, and for this reason, as I said a while ago, those are called fortunate who, whatever they start on, succeed in it without being good at reasoning. And deliberation is of no advantage to them, for they have in them a principle that is better than intellect and deliberation, while the others have not this, but have intellect. They have inspiration, but they cannot deliberate. For though lacking reason, they attain the attribute of the prudent and wise, that their divination is speedy, and we must mark off as included in it all but the judgment that comes from reasoning. In some cases it is due to experience, in others to habituation in the use of reflection, and both experience and habituation use God. This quality sees well the future and the present, and these are the men in whom the reasoning power is relaxed. Hence we have the melancholic men, the dreamers of what is true. For the moving principle seems to become stronger when the reasoning power is relaxed. So the blind remember better, their memory being freed from concern with the visible. It is clear then that there are two kinds of good luck, the one divine, and so the lucky seem to succeed owing to God. Men of this sort seem to succeed in following their aim, the others to succeed contrary to their aim. Both are irrational, but the one is persistent good luck, the other not. Chapter 15. About each virtue by itself we have already spoken. Now, since we have distinguished their natures separately, we must describe clearly the excellence that arises out of the combination of them, what we have already called nobility and goodness. That he who truly deserves this denomination must have the separate virtues is clear. It cannot be otherwise with other things either, for no one is healthy in his entire body, and yet healthy in no part of it, but the most numerous and important parts, if not all, must be in the same condition as the whole. Now goodness and nobility and goodness differ not only in name but also in themselves. For all goods have ends which are to be chosen for their own sake. Of these we call noble those which, existing all of them for their own sake, are praised. For these are those which are the source of praised acts, and are themselves praised, such as justice itself and just acts, also temperate acts, for temperance is praised, but health is not praised, for its effect is not, nor vigorous action, for vigor is not. These are good, but not praised. Induction makes this clear about the rest too. A good man, then, is one for whom the natural goods are good, for the goods men fight for and think the greatest, honor, wealth, bodily excellences, good fortune and power, are naturally good, but may be to some hurtful because of their dispositions. For neither the imprudent, nor the unjust, nor the intemperate would get any good from the employment of them, any more than an invalid from the food of a healthy man, or one weak and maimed from the equipment of one in health and sound in all limbs. A man is noble and good because those goods which are noble are possessed by him for themselves, and because he practices the noble, and for its own sake, the noble being the virtues and the acts that proceed from virtue. There is also what we may call the civic disposition, such as the Laconians have, and others like them might have. Its nature would be something like this. There are some who think one should have virtue, but only for the sake of the natural goods, and so such men are good, for the natural goods are good for them, but they have not nobility and goodness. For it is not true of them that they acquire the noble for itself, that they purpose acts good and noble at once. More than this, that what is not noble by nature, but good by nature, is noble to them, for objects are noble when a man's motives for acting and choosing them are noble. Wherefore, to the noble and good man, the naturally good is noble. For what is just is noble. Justice is proportioned to merit, and the perfect man merits these things. Or what is fitting is noble, and to the perfect man these things, wealth, high birth, and power, are fitting. So that to the perfect man things profitable are also noble, but to the many the profitable and the noble do not coincide. For things absolutely good are not good for them as they are for the good man. To the noble and good man they are also noble, for he does many noble deeds by reason of them. But the man who thinks he ought to have the virtues for the sake of external goods does deeds that are noble only per accidens. Nobility and goodness, then, is complete virtue. About pleasure, too, we have spoken, what it is, and in what sense good. We have said that the absolutely pleasant is also noble, and the absolutely good pleasant. But pleasure only arises in action. Therefore, the truly happy man will also live most pleasantly. That this should be so is no idle demand of man. But since the doctor has a standard by reference to which he distinguishes the healthy from the unhealthy body, and with reference to which each thing up to a certain point ought to be done and is wholesome, while if less or more is done, health is the result no longer, so in regard to actions and choice of what is naturally good, but not praiseworthy, the good man should have a standard both of disposition and of choice, and similarly in regard to avoidance of excess, or deficiency of wealth and good fortune, the standard being, as above said, as reason directs. This corresponds to saying in regard to diet that the standard should be medical science and its principles. But this, though true, is not clear. One must then, here as elsewhere, live with reference to the ruling principle, and with reference to the formed habit and the activity of the ruling principle, as the slave must live with reference to that of the master, and each of us by the rule proper to him. But since man is by nature composed of a ruling and a subject part, each of us should live according to the governing element within himself. But this is ambiguous, for medical science governs in one sense, health in another, the former existing for the latter. And so it is with the theoretic faculty, for God is not an imperative ruler, but is the end with a view to which prudence issues its commands. The word end is ambiguous, and has been distinguished elsewhere, for God at least needs nothing. What choice, then, or possession of the natural goods, whether bodily goods, wealth, friends, or other things, will most produce the contemplation of God, that choice or possession is best. This is the noblest standard, but any that through deficiency or excess hinders one from the contemplation and service of God is bad. This man possesses in his soul, and this is the best standard for the soul, to perceive the irrational part of the soul as such as little as possible. So much, then, for the standard of perfection, and the object of the absolute goods. End of chapter 15, and of book 7, and end of Eudemian Ethics by Aristotle, translated by J. Solomon. Read by Geoffrey Edwards. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.